Joining me now for more is Art Laffer, former Reagan economic advisor and Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. I was happy enough to be here when you got that medal, Art. It was great to see you then, great to see you now. Let me first ask about these PPI numbers, the Producer Price Index. Is it fair to say that inflation that producers are now paying for in terms of higher prices is going to be passed on to the consumers at the retail level?
That's very fair to say. It's a stage earlier, so when you see the Producer's Price Index inflation higher than the Consumer Price Index inflation, which it is by a large amount, 2.6 or 2.7%, that means you can really expect consumer prices to keep on rising on into the future, which is exactly what's going to happen as far as I can tell.
So let's put a fine point on it. That means, as Kevin Hassett and I believe you've been saying for a couple of months now, that we are headed towards, and right now we're probably in double-digit inflation.
Oh, we clearly are right now in double-digit inflation. And David, honestly, I don't see anything that would cause me to expect that inflation rate to start coming down. I mean, they have all these numbers that they swing around, this measure, core measure, all these other things. All of them basically tell the same type of story, that inflation is here for quite a while. There'll be individual components going up and down and all of that, and maybe a month or two where the numbers will come down a little bit. But over the next 12 months, I just don't see how they can bring that back under control without some major and drastic measures like Fed policy being correct, like Paul Volcker did it.
Well, what Paul Volcker did is to put the inflation, to put the interest rates above inflation. That's the way to bring it down. That's what Paul Volcker did.
That's the only way.
He brought it over 20%, the interest rates, when you had about 15% inflation. It worked. There was a big cost to pay for it, but it did work. If that happens now, we're going to have to immediately jump up our interest rates to above 10%, 11, 12%. I mean, I just don't think the Fed has that kind of backbone. Do you?
No, I don't think it has that backbone, and it surely does not have that leadership. When Volcker came in, when we came into office, David, in January 20th, 1981, inflation was in the mid-teens, like 15, 14, 16%, that range. The prime interest rate in this country of ours was 21.5%, maybe 4 or 5% above inflation, which it was required to be able to bring that inflation down. And even with it that tight and that strong, and Volcker being that courageous, it still took a long time for that inflation to come down. This is not a transitory inflation. Let me just say that. And it's not a Putin inflation. This is a Biden-Fed inflation of the first order, and it's really causing havoc and will continue to do so as long as they meddle around with these policies.
Well, we know what happened when Volcker pushed interest rates up higher than inflation. We had a deep recession. What would 11 or 12% interest rates do to the economy right now? Because we do have a very good labor market at the moment, many more jobs than we have people to fill those jobs. So are we in a better position to withstand these much higher interest rates to kill inflation?
Yeah, we are in a much better position to withstand these higher interest rates. I mean, let me just say in the first place that when Reagan came into office, we passed tax cuts, but we phased those tax cuts in, David, if you'll remember. So if you know that tax rates are going to be lower next year than they are this year, you're going to defer income and production to next year for the lower tax rates. We don't have that type of effect going on now at all. In fact, it may even be the reverse. So if they did it now, the effects on the economy would be much, much smaller than they were when Volcker was chairman of the Fed in 1981 and 1982.
Well,
so this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
You've got a tight labor market. You don't have anything causing deferral effects. And this is the time the Fed could do it and get that inflation down quickly without destroying the labor market or the goods market.
There is one thing.
They're not having any intent on doing that.
There's one thing that's worse now, and that's our debt. I mean, we have this tremendous debt because of all the COVID spending. It began under Trump. It continued under Biden. That's really caused a tremendous surge. And if you raise just 1%, the interest rate, if the Fed raises 1%, they've been doing these really picayune, 0.25% things. If they do it 1%, that increases. Put that graphic back up, because we're now paying $545 billion a year in annual debt payments for the national debt. 1% rate hike, $187 billion extra. If you get it up 7 percentage points, that'd be $1.3 trillion extra spending and debt servicing. Can we afford that?
Well, we can't afford not to do that, David. We just can't afford not to. All we're doing is postponing this process. The deficits are still pouring in. They lauded the fact that the deficit is down a large amount this month, but it's still an enormous, huge deficit this past month. And, it's all a gift from Biden. And, as long as they're not willing to look at the problem and take blame and take take responsibility for what's going on, there's very little chance we'll have any way of coming out of this. The only hope we have is what Mitch McConnell was saying in your earlier thing when he said, come November, we can change these things and the electorate can bring back sane policies. If you brought back sane policies, we could handle the national debt problem. That would take a big magnifying glass and a sharp pencil. But we could bring that back under control quite quickly. But without any recognition or really responsibility, there's no chance of that happening.
It's all finger pointing. It's all the problem of producers, the meat producers. It's the Putin price hike. But it's not just Art Laffer and Mitch McConnell that's talking about those excuses not passing the muster. It's Senator Manchin doing it. And James Furman, by the way, the former Obama economic advisor, was on Fox Business earlier. Let me just play a soundbite of what he had to say about all this. Roll tape.
I think it's important, though, to be able to simultaneously tell two stories, both of which are true. We're seeing phenomenally strong job growth, and we're seeing terrible inflation. And one of those is a good thing. One of those is not a good thing. And everyone needs to grasp both of them.
So what Jason Furman is saying, forgive me, I called him Jason. What he's saying is that the economy is strong enough to withstand the inflation. We'll get through this. You have to do the right thing. You have to cut deficit spending. My problem with that explanation is that inflation does have bad aspects of the economy. It does lead to a lot of businesses going out of business because they can't raise the prices enough. It leads to tremendous misery among consumers. So it really could, if it lasts much longer, begin to have extremely negative effects on the market, the economy, and those job surpluses may disappear.
Yeah, and let me correct Jason Furman, if I may, on this thing. Jason Furman said the good thing is that jobs are coming back fast. We do not have the employment level today that we had in February of 2019. We are still way below that level. So the jobs haven't come back at all to the way we would have hoped. They'd have just bounced right back. They are bouncing back very, very slowly, which is also a big problem. But the inflation long run is a serious, serious issue. And there's no way of getting around it. You got to stop it, and you got to stop it now and fast. And the right policies are encourage economic growth and more goods in the marketplace and tighter money, meaning more goods, less money, and that will start the inflation, bringing it down. But, David, it's going to take a long time for that to happen.
Well, let me push back a little, Art, because
4 or 5 years?
My former boss, your former editor at the Wall Street Journal, Bob Bartley, who was a big supply sider, one of the founders of the supply side movement, that you believe it, he said that the moment that the tax cuts, the Reagan tax cuts, kicked in was the end of the recession in the early 1980s. Yes, what Volcker did caused a recession, but when we began to get the production, the supply coming out of more production, more growth in the United States because of those tax cuts, that cured the inflation. That cured the recession. What do you say?
You have it exactly right. That's exactly what a wonderful man Bob Bartley was. Yeah. But the tax cuts began on January 1st, 1983. That's when the boom. David, from January 1st, 1983 through June 30th of 1984, the U.S. economy in real terms grew by 12%. That's at an 8% per annum rate for a year and a half. Wow. That's Chinese growth rates. We can do it again if we only had good leadership.
Yeah, real growth rates, not Chinese growth rates, I would say.
Real growth rates, real supply responses.
It was an amazing
year. The drop in unemployment, the prosperity, the stock market. I mean, how wonderful was that era? Look at it today, and you want to cry for America. You just want to cry for it.
But you have to have a leader who's willing to cut tax rates, and I don't see that in Joe Biden.
We'll get that leader. Don't worry. That leader will come. I can't tell you who it is because I don't know.
Yeah, nobody does.
But we will get that leader. You know, this leadership will be thrust upon someone to really make the changes occur. I I mean, look at Zelensky in Ukraine. I mean, who would have guessed him to be the leader he is?
Yeah.
You know, he had greatness thrust upon him. The next president of the United States will also have greatness thrust upon him, and you can see a prosperity period for the U.S. as far as the eye can see.
All right,
I just want
Laffer,
to make
that's
sure
why
I
you
stick
look
around
like
on
a,
this
you
planet
still look
long
like
enough
a,
to see it.
you still look like a 40-year-old because you have that sense of optimism.
Oh, get
you
up.
still
Thank
have
you
that
very
sense
much, David. But
it's a
your
healthy
nose
way
is
to live your
growing
life.
awfully rapidly.
All right, but you also know
Thank
from
you, sir.
experience. Art Laffer, great to see you, my friend. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.